not real. Oh, don't be a putz, David.
Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and the moors. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at An American Werewolf in London. This 1981 horror comedy follows a pair of American college students who are backpacking through northern England, only to be attacked by a werewolf in the countryside. As survivor David deals with the trauma of the attack and the loss of his best friend, he soon finds himself haunted by Jack's mutilated spirit. He warns David that he will soon transform into a werewolf during the next full moon, and he must decide between killing himself or living life as a vicious monster. An American Werewolf in London was written and directed by John Landis, a prolific actor and director mostly known for his work in comedy. This is one of his rare ventures into horror, but a few of his classics include The Blues Brothers, Animal House, and Coming to America. He also directed the Time Out sequence in the Twilight Zone movie. An American Werewolf is actually one of the very first scripts Landis wrote, but he shelved it for over a decade as he built up credibility in the industry. He was inspired to write the story during his time in Yugoslavia, where he witnessed a group of Romani people apparently performing a burial ritual to prevent the deceased from rising from the grave. The film stars David Naughton from Midnight Madness as David Kessler, Griffin Dunne from After Hours as Jack Goodman, Jenny Agutter from Child's Play 2 as Nurse Alex Price, John Woodvine from The Devils as Dr. Hirsch, and Don McKillop from The Hound of Baskervilles as Inspector Villiers. The film was primarily shot in Wales during the spring during its rainy season, as Landis wanted the film to really have a dreary atmosphere. Cinematography was handled by Robert Painter, a frequent Landis collaborator who shot films like The Little Shop of Horrors, Trading Places, and Superman 2. The score was composed by Elmer Bernstein of classics like The Magnificent Seven, To Kill a Mockingbird, and Ghostbusters. The soundtrack features as many songs about the moon as they could possibly fit into the movie, including Van Morrison's Moondance, Creedence Clearwater Revival's Bad Moon Rising, and 3 different versions of Blue Moon. The film is probably most well known for its iconic werewolf effects and transformation sequences, which were designed and created by the incredible Rick Baker. We last discussed his work during my review of Videodrome, but his awesome effects can be seen in Star Wars, The Fury, The Funhouse, Starman, Gremlins 2, Batman Forever, The Frighteners, Men in Black, The Ring, and Hellboy, just to name a few. The film ended up being a big hit, making $62 million at the box office on just a $6 million budget. It was met with mixed reviews from critics at the time, all of whom appreciated the film's fantastic effects, but some of whom felt the tone was a bit mishmashed and the story felt a bit unpolished. But it was generally loved by the horror community, winning Best Makeup at the Academy Awards, along with Best Makeup and Best Horror Film at the Saturn Awards. It's widely considered one of the best werewolf films and one of the best horror comedies of all time, and I certainly can't disagree. An American Werewolf is such a unique vibe, and it has some really amazing effects. Thank you so much to my patron Dan for requesting this for me to review. I think this should be a really good time. We better stay off the road and beware the moon, 'cause we're watching An American Werewolf in London. The movie opens on some shots of England's rolling hills as we get a soulful rendition of Blue Moon as we join hitchhiking duo David and Jack. They've come from America on a 3-month backpacking trip across Europe, starting in the rural town of East Proctor. Their driver advises them to stay out of the moors, which is British for woods, fields, and other uncultivated land. Jack isn't exactly excited about this sheepish start to their trip, but David convinces him it won't be so bad. On their way to town, they talk about girls and tell knock-knock jokes, but their laughing stops when they come across a pub called the Slaughtered Lamb. And the same goes for the locals as the plucky Americans enter. The boys take a seat and quickly run through the list of everything this bar doesn't have, although the bartender does offer them a hot cup of tea. Jack immediately notices a giant 5-pronged star on the wall, and it ain't 'cause the owners are from Texas. He recalls it as a symbol used for witchcraft, even being considered the mark of the Wolfman. Jack interrupts a questionable joke about the Alamo to ask about the star, which reverts the locals back to being hostile. The boys agree with them it's probably time to get moving, although the bartender argues they can't just let them leave. Something tells me the boys won't keep clear of the moors. The locals discuss whether they should call them back inside, as they will surely be killed if they stay out there. The boys immediately start wandering through the goddamn moors as it begins to rain, and the locals argue over what will happen to their community if their big secret sees the light of day. They hear a gruesome howl in the distance, as do the boys. They realize it's a full moon and they are far from the road, and as the howls get closer they double back towards the pub. They realize they are being circled, and David takes a spill as they make a run for it. This means Jack is the poor fucker who gets mauled by a werewolf, and David straight up leaves his friend to die. He has a change of heart and turns back, but Jack is very dead and the werewolf is very angry. It's only able to slash him a few times before the locals arrive guns a-blazing though. They successfully kill the beast, causing it to revert back to its human form. David passes out and he doesn't wake up until 3 weeks later in a London hospital. He's been watched over by Nurse Alex Price and Dr. Hirsch, the latter of whom shares with the nurse that David was supposedly attacked by a madman. David isn't exactly chatty yet, he's still too busy running through the moors in his mind. A bit later, he's greeted by Hirsch and a US Embassy representative named Collins. They explain that he's in London, 3 weeks have passed since his attack, and Jack did not survive his injuries. They sedate David when he starts freaking the fuck out, and as he passes out, he tells them it wasn't a man that attacked him, it was a wolf. David is visited by Inspector Villiers and Sergeant McManus, the former of whom refuses to consider the idea that they were attacked by an animal. They've got the body of their attacker and many witnesses to the crime, and Villiers suggests that this wolf is just a coping mechanism to deal with the trauma. Once they leave, David confides in the doctor, sharing that there is no way anybody witnessed the attack until the very end. He's worried he's starting to lose his mind. Hey, maybe you left it in the moors, David. Maybe this friendly deer can help you look for it. Oh, I don't think it's inside the deer, David. David hasn't been eating his meals, citing that he simply isn't hungry, so flirtatious Alex opts to feed him herself. David's troubling dreams continue, and Hirsch still doesn't buy his story. The doctor does admit he never saw Jack's body, and was curious as to why and how his wounds were practically healed by the time he got to London. But he assures David that if there was a monster roaming England, it would be well known, and he asks him to move past the idea. Alex and David grow closer as she reads to him in the evening, but that doesn't stop him from having an absolute fucking fever dream in the night. He is back home with his family when they get a knock at the door, only for a horde of monstrous zombie Nazis to mow down his family with machine guns, set the house on fire, and slash his throat. He wakes and tells Alex about his nightmare. Oh no, a dream within a dream! David's visions are now interrupting breakfast time as well, as Jack's mutilated spirit has arrived to explain what is going on.
I realize I don't look so hot, David, but I thought you'd be glad to see me.
He explains that they were in fact attacked by a werewolf. Because he was killed unnaturally, Jack is forced to walk the earth in limbo until the werewolf's curse is lifted. He needs the werewolf's bloodline to end, the last werewolf to be destroyed. Any guesses on who the last werewolf is? Jack tells David to kill himself before he starts killing innocents. David responds to this news by kissing Alex, also sharing the exciting news he just learned. She obviously thinks he just had another nightmare and inexplicably invites him to stay with her. Gotta have a reason for the American werewolf to stay in London, I guess. She gives him the grand one-bedroom apartment tour, which ends in a soapy, sudsy good time in the shower and an extended PG-13 sex scene. His late-night leak has him run into Undead Jack again, who's impressed he was able to get laid during such a dangerous situation. He reminds David that tomorrow is a full moon and he needs to kill himself before it's too late. David believes he's simply going insane, but Jack warns him that everyone he kills will become undead like him. Alex awakens to voices in the living room, and despite David literally announcing he is crazy, she brings him back to bed. She believes he is just processing the guilt of losing his best friend, but luckily she has some kind of pity kink that makes his confusion and misery attractive. Meanwhile, Dr. Hirsch has taken it upon himself to visit East Proctor, hoping to learn why David keeps rambling about werewolves. The locals have opted to pretend they know absolutely nothing about the American boys, giving him the same cold shoulder as before. The dart-playing fella supposedly heads out to check on his dogs, but his real intention is to spill the tea. He tells Hirsch that David is in danger and soon others will be once the moon is full, but the chess player arrives and scares him away. Alex leaves David to his own devices while she goes to work, and it appears four-legged friends are not a fan of him. Night falls as David does his best werewolf impression and watches ads for porn, and some Creedence Clearwater Revival, followed by another rendition of Blue Moon, kicks in to initiate the transformation we've all been waiting for. David begins writhing in pain and feeling like he's on fire, removing his clothes before watching his hands and feet gruesomely start to extend. He starts sprouting fur all over his body as he falls onto all fours as his new muscles, bones, teeth, and eyes begin to form. I cannot express how painful it looks, culminating in a beautiful snoot extending outward from his face. David lets out a vicious howl to the moon before going on a hunt. His first victims are a happy couple strolling through a park. Hirsch returns to the hospital and asks Alex if she has seen David since his release, and she gives him the number to her flat. He is obviously long gone at the moment though. He shares with Alex that the people of East Proctor have feigned ignorance about the attack, and the police have even misplaced the file. He now believes the people of East Proctor convinced David that he was attacked by a werewolf, and now fears this neurosis will cause him to behave like one, potentially hurting himself and others. He decides it's probably time they notify the authorities. David's next victims are a trio of homeless men he kills off screen, and his final victim for the evening is a man named Gerald waiting in the subway. He heads out after hearing some ominous growls, but he soon finds himself being chased through the cavernous halls of the station. He collapses on the escalator, and David also rips him apart off screen. Our sleepy werewolf wakes the next morning in the zoo's wolf enclosure. Luckily, he's able to escape. Well, that is after he steals balloons from a child and an overcoat from an elderly woman.
Yes, sir? A naked American man stole my balloon.
Hirsch learns via the paper that 6 people were brutally murdered last night, and a newly energized David returns to Alex feeling better than ever. She tells Hirsch he has returned and seems generally rational, and she agrees to bring him straight to the hospital. The lovebirds are interrupted by their taxi driver telling them about the 6 murders last night. David immediately realizes he's responsible and flees from the taxi, opting to confess what he's done in order to be locked up by nightfall. Despite his confession and several slanderous claims about British royalty, the officer refuses to arrest him. David confesses his love to Alex before running away, hoping to keep her out of danger. She and Hirsch update Villiers and McManus, who aren't convinced David is responsible but agree to search for him. David calls up his family, but only his little sister is home. He tells her to tell the entire family that he loves them in what is surprisingly a human and sad scene. He whips out a pocket knife and attempts to cut his own wrists, but he simply doesn't have it in him. Jack beckons to him from an adult movie theater, and our undead friend is looking just about skeletal at this point. He introduces David to the 6 people he murdered last night, all of whom are in the same rotting purgatory as Jack. They all agree that David needs to off himself, and they throw a lot of creative ideas his way on how to do it.
A knife.
An electric shock.
A car crash?
You could throw yourself in front of a tube.
Drowning.
Night falls, and David begins his transformation right in the middle of the porno theater. He starts ripping through the perverts and employees, and the panic quickly attracts the police. An officer finds him munching on a man, and he calls for reinforcements as they lock down the theater. Villiers and McManus are among those to arrive on the scene, just in time for David to escape and rip the inspector's head right off. Panic ensues as he prowls through the streets, causing a ton of death and destruction as people crash their vehicles into the crowds. Hirsch catches wind of the chaos and nabs Alex on the way, and the police manage to push David into a dead-end alleyway. The officers arm themselves to the teeth as they prepare to move in, but Alex breaks through the mob in order to save David. She tells him they are going to kill him if he doesn't let her help him, also confessing her love to him. She seems to get through to him for just a moment before the werewolf charges at her, and the officers riddle him with bullets. He reverts to his human form, and the movie ends as the crowd surrounds his corpse. And that's An American Werewolf in London. Man, what a weird movie. I honestly forgot how uncomfortable and awkward it really is, and I mean that in a really positive way. Forgetting about the actual werewolf stuff for a minute, there is so much atmosphere built up in the film. England, both in the rural moors and in the urban sprawl of London, is made to feel like a lonely, dreary place where dreams go to die. Everybody seems fucking miserable. And that uncomfortability permeates every conversation in the film as they are filled with disbelief, sarcasm, and long, awkward pauses. And it's that awkwardness that feeds directly into the comedy, as a lot of the jokes here are really dry. Every line here teeters between being really funny and really depressing. It's got a great balance of dark humor. The film not only focuses on the physical effects of becoming a werewolf, but also on the mental and spiritual. David's increasingly disturbing visions are a great illustration for his fracturing mind, representing the beast within him making itself at home. That Nazi zombie dream sequence comes so far out of left field, but while it's mostly for shock value, it means more than just a random bad dream. That moment is the one and only time we see David's family, who couldn't be bothered to visit him after being brutally attacked. This dream highlights how alone David truly is, especially now that his one and only friend is dead. At least this loneliness draws interest and pity from Alex, who really is his only beacon of hope in the film. This obviously goes without saying, but the practical effects on display here are phenomenal. In my opinion, this is the best werewolf transformation ever put to screen. There's a few other strong contenders like The Howling and Fright Night, but this one just has everything. Most films had to do well-placed cuts to switch in between body parts as they transformed, but Rick Baker came up with simple yet effective ways to allow the audience to witness way more of the changes on camera. Watching those limbs stretch while still being attached to the rest of David looks agonizing, and somehow the goofy-ass music only makes it more disturbing. I also love Jack's deteriorating spirit. Watching him go from a shredded but still goofy young man into a completely unrecognizable corpse is unsettling as hell. And Jack's presence is honestly my favorite aspect of this film. I might be blanking on a couple other instances at the moment, but this is really the only film I can think of where the killer is haunted by his victims in this kind of way. Not only are you cursed to become a monster and kill people, you'll also have to come face to face with those victims as they try to get you to kill yourself. That final sequence in the theater is hilarious, and it's moments like that that help An American Werewolf stand out in a subgenre that sometimes struggles to do anything new. But that isn't to say this movie is skimping on classic werewolf stuff either. The initial attack where Jack is killed is really atmospheric and creepy, not to mention gruesome, and we get some great moments after David is transformed as well. Everything about the London Underground sequence is perfect. I love that we only get a glimpse of him from really far away. And I like the really canine final look for the werewolf as opposed to the bipedal, more human forms that most movies give us. It somehow makes the transformation even more sad for me, like David really isn't present once the monster takes over. The final sequence in Piccadilly Circus is also fantastic. Placing a werewolf into such a modern, congested space just makes for great visuals. I do wish some of David's early kills were shown a bit more on screen. They really all are just a flash of the werewolf head and then cutting away. And as a general critique, the film is pretty slow at times. In between the big sequences, it can really feel like the film is just padding the runtime. I'm never full on board thanks to the comedy and great music laced into the story, but there are literally times where we're just watching David kill time until night falls. But I also really like that the plot isn't super involved and complex, as the entire premise is based around this really fucked up thing happening to an average Joe. David is just a normal, kind of boring kid who finds himself inside of something much bigger and scarier than himself. All in all, An American Werewolf in London is a really unique take on a classic monster. It pays a ton of homage to the stories and films that came before it, while also poking fun at the premise and expanding the lore in unexpected ways. It boasts some of the greatest practical effects ever put on camera, and it manages to be way more bleak and contemplative than a horror comedy has any right to be. I can't say for sure if it's my favorite werewolf film, but it's absolutely in my top 5 easily. Thank you again to my patron Dan for requesting An American Werewolf for me to review. It was really fun to revisit this one. But what did y'all think of the film? Let me know down in the comments. I've also never seen An American Werewolf in Paris. Do you think it's worth me checking out? Well, that's about it. Join me in 2 weeks as we check out Jason Takes Manhattan. That should be a humorous review if nothing else. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of An American Werewolf in London. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks, y'all.